A few years ago, something very weird happened with my best friend and I. I was 15 years old. One night I decided to sleep over at my friend's house. After a night of scary movies, we were in the mood to do something exciting. Not far from my friend's house was a demolishing site. A block of houses in a very terrible state that would be demolished the day after tomorrow. The local government would demolish them to make room for new houses. The whole site was fenced in and warning signs saying "Do not enter" hung everywhere. The houses were boarded up by planks. Doors and windows were sealed shut. No one could get in. We decided to go for a walk on the old block and take some random photographs. My friend knew a spot where we could enter the old block. When we walked there, we noticed that every house was boarded up tight, so we couldn't get in. We noticed a house with a window on the top floor that wasn't very well boarded up. We could see into the room. We took a photo with a digital camera. Later we went home and took a look at the pictures we made. Suddenly, we came across the photo of the window. We saw a woman dressed in a brown raincoat with white skin and black hair as long as we could visibly see. The woman looked very sad. We hadn't seen any woman up there when we took the picture. Moreover, the windows and doors were boarded. We went back to the house to see if that was correct. After investigation, it really was. Everything was tied shut, and there was no woman. This story isn't mine, but rather of my friend from Japan. I'll call him Rita. It happened back when Rita was only about 11 or 12 years old. Rita was a rather attractive kid and had his fair share of admirers. One girl was extreme with her crush though. I'll call her Ayano. Ayano was a lot older than Rita. She was 17. She was an acquaintance of Rita and lived down the road from him. Rita hadn't thought much of her until she started stalking him. Every day and every night, she would be following him one way or another, whether it be in person or online. Rita first started getting the creeps when she would start messaging him over 20 times a day. Stuff like, "Be safe," "Are you alright?" "Sleep well," etc. This was a little weird, but he overlooked it. Then the messages started getting creepier. Instead of the usual checkup emails, they got more personal. Things like, "You should eat your lunch," if he skipped lunch, or "I think your sister's hungry," when his little sister was crying. Rita stopped using both his phone and social media at this point. But it doesn't end there. Rita's mother was almost never home, so he was frequently looked after by babysitters. One day he had a new babysitter. It was Ayano. Nothing was particularly strange as she looked after him and his siblings, but she did get a lot closer to his mother than he would like. One day at school, Ayano approached Rita and told him that his mother would be out of the country for a week, and that she told her to let Rita stay at her house. Rita was hesitant at first, but hey, it was his mother's wish. He couldn't go against that. Ayano told him that his mother had already left, so he could go home with her after school that day. Rita reluctantly agreed and went home with her. When he got there, her parents weren't home. Things get a little blurry here as my friend choked up telling the story, as it still scares him today. He said Ayano would play weird games with him, stuff like family, where she insisted she was the wife and he was the husband, as well as things like cops and robbers, and games to see who would get scared first, where she would blindfold him and leave him in a silent room for hours on end. It was 5 days into staying at her house, and Ayano had gone to her part-time job. She had left the doors locked and the windows were too high to jump from, so he just stayed in front of the TV, where he saw a chilling news report. It was a missing child report, the missing child being him. Before he had the time to catch the number to call, the TV switched off, and Ayano was standing behind him with the remote in her hand. Rita had freaked out, crying and screaming. Ayano held him, but he managed to wiggle from her grasp just in time to open a window and cry for help. Luckily for him, a couple were walking past, heard his cries and called the police. Within an hour, police arrived and found him locked in her bedroom with a blindfold and his hands tied. Due to Ayano still being a minor, Rita is unsure of what happened to her. He says he only remembers the police taking her away while his mother was hugging him. He moved to Australia after this and hasn't seen his kidnapper since, but he still cowers at the sound of her name. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, So I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommates that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I went down a short side street in order to loop back down my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back, and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved, until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked and I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point that I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice. That only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him got bigger and bigger. He was coming back my way. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of my way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. In the mid-80s, My mom was a cleaner in Australia. She would clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural or wine regions. She would leave business cards at the local shops and got most of her business this way, and some through referrals and word of mouth. One day she got a call from a lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking Mom to clean her old farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands, and Mom would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady did not want to meet my mom and said she would leave the keys under the front doormat. Mom agreed, mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and was offering to pay Mom substantially more than she would reasonably expect. Mom went to the house on a Monday morning and said she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut. Mom was told no one would be at the house, so she immediately felt unsafe. She stood frozen in the kitchen for what she said felt like 3 or 4 minutes, although she said it could have been much longer. There was no other car on the property. She wanted to leave immediately, but had 2 rooms left to do. Both were bedrooms. She said as time passed and she heard nothing else, she decided that perhaps it was nothing, or perhaps something had fallen and it wasn't the door after all. She walked up the hallway and stepped into the bedroom. All over the bed were black and white photos. As Mom got closer, she realized that the photos were all of her. Some were taken at our family home, and others were taken at other houses Mom would clean. Some through windows or over fences. She used the house phone to call the police and immediately drove to the end of the driveway. The lady ended up being investigated, but continued to claim that it was a break-in. After some time, the police stopped with their searching and we ended up moving to a new town 4 months later. I'm 22, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led to my apartment locks itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while talking on the phone with my friend. I returned to the apartment and sat on the bed while opening the mail while using the phone. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor and stretch for it. I saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under my bed. My eyes widened and I choked the urge to scream. The person under my bed was lying still with his back towards me and his head to his chest, so I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone, said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm just gonna take a shower and call you back." The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hastily walked in, quietly locked the door, turned the shower on, jumped out my window, and called the police. They told me to wait nearby, but to go across the street and see if anybody comes out the door of the apartment complex. This was during the summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while watching my open bathroom window and the entry door. I called my friend and he came over just before the police. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, 2 cops came out holding a thin and tired-looking man. His eyes looked crazy, but he didn't try to get away. The policeman that stood beside me and comforted me while the police searched through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives, waiting for me to come out. This man had somehow crept in my entry door while I was getting my mail and hid under the bed. The man that was trying to hurt me turned out to be a homeless person and was placed in a mental hospital. When I was 21, me and my girlfriend were upstate in my family's vacation mobile home. It was during a snowstorm and we were sitting on the couch next to the heater, snuggling and watching late-night TV. We were surrounded by absolutely nothing but forest in all directions, and all that was keeping us from the outside was a wooden door that had a broken lock. The last time my grandparents came up, my grandpa put a few cinder blocks by the door to use as a kind of barrier in the meantime, since the door opened inwards. Anyway, while we were watching TV, my girlfriend started shaking me, telling me she heard something outside. I assured her it was most likely a deer or a bear or something, but then 5 minutes later, my girlfriend looked at me again. I heard it too. I muted the TV so we could hear it better. It sounded like someone was messing around in the little lawnmower shed outside. My car was parked outside and all the lights were on inside. If there was anybody out there, they knew we were inside. My girlfriend was urging me to go outside and check it out, but I told her she must be crazy to think that I was going out there. The sound stopped and there was nothing but the sound of the storm outside now. After a few minutes, I felt it safe to shut the inside lights and open the blinds to take a quick look outside, but it was too dark to see anything. I turned on the porch light and I was able to see a good portion of the front yard outside. There were footprints in the snow, not animal footprints. They were clearly shoe prints, and they were headed in the direction of the backyard. I went to open the curtains to the backyard window, and when I did, I felt the urge to scream, but my girlfriend did instead. Even though there were no lights in the backyard, we could see a man dressed in all black and wearing a vendetta mask facing the window. I immediately shut the blinds and told my girlfriend to go hide in the bedroom, while I grabbed my grandpa's hunting rifle out of the closet. I pushed the cinder blocks and a bunch of other heavy objects in front of the door as a barricade, shut all the blinds and lights, and went to hide with my girlfriend in the corner of the bedroom. There was a bang at the front door. He was trying to bust open the door. I don't even think he tried the knob, but it didn't matter either way. After a few futile bangs to the door, it seems the man finally gave up. I stayed up that whole night with the gun by my side while my girlfriend slept. We packed and left first thing in the morning, but the scary thing, there was a fresh set of footprints leading from the front yard window out into the woods. I haven't been up there since, but my grandparents have, and they said that there was no sign of a break-in or anything missing. I don't plan on ever going back up there. Back when my grandma was still alive, I would always walk down the block to her house every day to help with various chores. There was this one day that I walked over to her house the same time I always did and decided to let myself in. I was surprised she left the door unlocked. She was a very paranoid old lady and normally kept everything locked. I saw her bedroom door was opened upstairs, and I heard her opening and closing drawers and cabinets. I walked upstairs calling Grandma, and as I was about 5 feet from the door, she slammed her bedroom door shut. I knocked, asking if everything was all right, and at that moment my cell phone began to ring. It was my grandma's phone number. I was so confused, but I picked up the phone anyway. My grandma was on the other end, telling me not to come over that day, as she was walking over to her seniors club. I felt my heart skip a beat as she told me this. I hung up the phone before she could say anything else, remaining silent. I knew exactly what was going on. I played dumb and said, "Grandma, I'll be downstairs," and made my way to my grandma's kitchen to grab a knife and dial 911. It remained silent in the bedroom after what happened. The police arrived and burst into the bedroom, and the loud and sudden bang of a gunshot caught me off guard. When the paramedics arrived and wheeled out the intruder, I recognized the man's face. It was my grandma's next-door neighbor. Apparently, he saw that my grandmother had left the house and broke in to look for jewelry, and when the police broke into the bedroom, they found the man hiding next to the door with a large knife in hand. If I had walked into that bedroom, I would have been as good as dead. The most haunting memory of my life. Me and my wife were getting home from dinner out, and as soon as we stepped out of the car, we noticed that our front door to our house was open. I told my wife to wait outside while I ran inside and ran straight up to our bedroom, where I hid the shotgun. I loaded the gun and scanned every single room upstairs. There was no sign of anybody. I made my way down to scanning the main floor, followed by the basement. There was no sign of anybody, and there was nothing missing or moved. I called the cops, and when they arrived, I told them what happened, and they began to investigate some rooms upstairs, followed by the basement. Nothing was turned up. They made a case of asking us if we were positive that we shut the door when we left. I myself was starting to have doubts, not completely sure if I had, but my wife remained confident that we had shut the door. The police seemed sure that if somebody had broken in, they didn't stick around long, as there didn't seem to be any signs of burglary. My wife was worried sick, crying that she wasn't comfortable being in the house. I comforted her the best I could, assuring her that whoever broke in the house left in a hurry. I finally fell asleep after hours of rolling around in the bed, but my sleep was immediately cut short by the disturbing scream of my wife. I looked at her, and she was staring intently in the direction of the closet. It hit me like a bullet just then. I had forgotten to check the second closet. I looked over and saw for the briefest second A man poking his head out of the closet before closing the closet door. Within 5 seconds, I had the shotgun loaded in hand and cocked it back to let the intruder know that I was armed. I screamed for him to come out, and just like that, the closet door opened, but instead of showing submission, he made a mad dash for the front door of the house. I could have shot him, but I didn't have it in me. He was never caught. He got away with it scot-free. I think having that gun saved us from a terrible fate. About a year ago, while still living under my parents' roof, I started experiencing some weird occurrences in my house, specifically my bedroom. While I was laying awake in my bed one late night, I heard a creaking sound coming from across the bedroom. My closet door had somehow been opened. When I got up to check it, I subconsciously checked for anybody inside my closet, even though I was 26 years old. Of course there was nobody inside, so I shut the door and went back to bed. Later that same night, I would hear rumbly, rattling noises coming from up above the ceiling. It sounded like something in the air ducts. It was a very strange sound. I really had no idea what to think about it, but as soon as it stopped, I kind of forgot about it quickly and fell asleep. In the morning, I did tell my dad about sounds in the attic the previous night, but annoyingly, he didn't seem too interested, or he just didn't take me very seriously. That night, I again lay in my bed awake, reflecting on life, when yet again, the slow creak of the closet door creeping open broke the silence. This time, I felt genuinely afraid. I knew the door was completely shut. It would take somebody twisting the doorknob for it to be able to push open. This time I took an extra careful look inside the closet for anybody, even though it wasn't a big closet and there really wasn't anywhere somebody could hide. I rationalized it as being a broken doorknob or something. And that same night, I again heard the rattling sounds coming from above the ceiling. It was exactly what happened the previous night. The next morning I convinced my dad to take a look at my closet door, but he quickly determined that the door was fine. When it was closed, he pulled on it, and it showed no signs of coming off the latch. Of course, he suggested that I was simply leaving the door unlatched, but I knew I wasn't. That night, I sat up, waiting for it to happen again, and right on cue, the closet door creaked open. I waited for the sounds above the ceiling, but there was just a long silence. I turned on my lamp and looked up to the air vents in my room, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. I could distinctly see two wide-open eyes peering through the vents at me. My parents barged into my room asking if I had gone insane. I explained everything, and they looked at each other like I had completely lost it. Not surprisingly, they dismissed it as a dream or the fact that I was too tired and was seeing things. They even began to lecture me about staying up too late. But to this day, I know I hadn't imagined it. It was too real. And the closet opening routinely? I know for a fact that wasn't in my imagination. I have never been a believer in the paranormal, but I still have absolutely no other explanation for those 3 nights. I live in the Poconos with my wife and kids. There's a small lake about a quarter-mile away from our backyard. I commonly take my kids down there to go swimming. Up until last week, that is. Now, I'm never letting them go down there again. I haven't told anyone about this in fear of sounding crazy. It was last Saturday. We went over to the lake and set up our chairs on the sand. It's like a little private beach in our own backyard. It's been amazing. Me and my wife sat in our beach chairs enjoying the sun while our kids were splashing around in the water. I always tell them not to go too deep. They're still young, 6 and 8. We sat there for a good 2 hours that day. Neither of us were in the mood to get wet. Eventually, my wife got tired and decided to walk back home. I agreed to stay with the kids a little while longer, as they were somehow still having so much fun playing in the sand and water. The sun was setting at this point, and I was getting tired. They were going a little too deep, so I called at them to come back closer to the shore. They couldn't hear me apparently, so I stood up and got closer. Before I could call them again, I noticed something in the water. It looked like a black, roundish object, and it was moving closer to my kids. I ran into the water closer to my kids, calling them to come out. When they got close enough, I dragged them out myself. When I turned back to the water, the object was gone. My kids were confused as hell. I didn't know what to tell them, so I just told them it was time to go home. We packed up and walked back to the house, but I wasn't happy when I got home. I was uncomfortable with what I just saw. That thing looked like no sea creature known to man. Dinner was waiting for us when we got home. I ate really slow, thinking about the object in the water and whether or not to tell my wife. My wife asked me what's wrong. She noticed that I was eating slow. I decided not to tell her right then. After dinner, I took a flashlight with me and walked back down to the lake. By then, it was already dark out. I got to the lake, but to be honest, I didn't even know what I was expecting to find. I shined the flashlight all around the surface of the water, searching for the black object, and just then, I heard a large splash come from somewhere in the lake. The kind of splash of something emerging out of the water. I thought it might be some kind of animal in the lake. I shined the light all over the place, searching for the source of the sound, and then I found it, and I realized I was dead wrong. There was a silhouette of a humanoid figure with long black hair covering its whole face. It just stood there, facing me, but not staring at me. Not that I could tell. I dropped the flashlight in horror and sprinted all the way back up to my house, slamming the door shut behind me. I haven't told anybody about this. What kills me is that lake is only a quarter mile away from my house, and for all I know, that thing could be watching me through my window right now as I write this. This happened to my dad when he was a little kid. I think it messed him up a bit emotionally, but he never admitted it. This story freaks me out just imagining it. So I'm pretty sure my dad was 10 years old and he was home alone for whatever reason. He was watching TV in the living room. It was the only TV in the house. And all of a sudden, the TV just shut off. So he got up and turned it back on. It was an old shitty TV, so it wasn't weird at all. When he got back on his couch, it happened again. He got up once again and turned the TV back on. And again it turned off. He repeated this process a couple more times before he started to look for the remote. While looking for the remote, he walked over to check behind one of the couches and saw a man hiding in the corner, holding the TV remote. My dad described the man as having long, messy hair and a crazed look in his eyes. He gave my dad a smile, and my dad ran out the front door screaming like a little girl. He went to his neighbors, who called the police. The man was still in the house when the police got there, so he was arrested. My dad told me that he still assumes the man was either homeless or crazy. Either way, this story is downright terrifying. My friend told me about something that happened to her when she was younger, about 8 or 9. She was walking home from school and got her key out to let herself into the house. Her single mom worked and came home later on weekdays. As she reached up to put the key in the door, her mom opened it in a dressing gown, having left work sick. Instead of greeting her, she looked straight past my friend and immediately said, "Who are you?" My friend turned around, and a man in a long coat hurried back down the path and down the street. Being ill that day had possibly saved her daughter from something potentially horrible happening to her. Before I start this story, I want to note that Jacob's mother is a drug addict, and his father really didn't have much wrong with him outside of being with his mother. So one night, when Jacob and his father were asleep, they heard a series of loud banging, scratching, and moving noises coming from the mother's room. Jacob's father jumped out of the bed and ran down the hall and started slamming on the door. His mother opened it, yelling at him to quiet down and that he woke her up. He asked her about the sounds. She hadn't been awake to hear them. Jacob's dad would have assumed that she was on something again. But something was wrong. The window was open all the way, and the TV was moved across the room, still plugged in, and had the screen facing outside. Jacob's dad was reasonably scared. He shut the window, got his bat, locked the mother's room from the outside, and made her sleep in the living room. He stayed up most of the night. He woke up Jacob at 5. It was still dark out. Jacob went out to the kitchen where his mother already was. A couple minutes later, his dad walked in, wide-eyed. He pointed at Jacob and his mother and held his finger to his lips. They both quieted down. They heard something shuffling around on the roof, going from edge to edge. Jacob's dad had the bat. They sat together in the room quietly. Minutes later, the sound went away. Jacob's grandmother was called. She was asked if everybody could stay over there for a little while. She said yes and told them she'd come pick them up. Jacob finished eating and went to go sit on the couch. There was no TV in that room, so he sat in silence. He looked over at a door to an empty room in the hallway. The door was open. There was a finger wrapped around the side of it. Jacob screamed and pointed to it, and his father grabbed him and ran out. Jacob's mother followed behind. They went to a gas station and sat out front until they saw Jacob's grandmother's truck. Jacob described how unnatural the finger looked to me. He said it reminded him a little bit of a foam finger in length and width. It was wrapped clear around the door frame, the door itself being latched on the opposite side. They didn't go back to that house much after that. Once they'd gotten everything out of it, they never went back again. Nothing was stolen, and the window in the empty room was open. I was 13 years old. I had the most isolated bedroom imaginable. Mix that with a wild imagination, and I was often up late at night, scared and paranoid, unable to fall asleep. My bedroom was a separate floor of the house, on the opposite side of my parents' room. They had no way of hearing what was going on in my room. So it was a seemingly ordinary night, with a bit of rain, but not a storm. I woke up and looked at my clock, and saw that it was 2 in the morning. I got an uncomfortable feeling right away, but I didn't know why. I then saw at the edge of my bed, there was a shadow of something roundish just over the head of the edge of my bed. My heart started racing until I realized it was just my hat. I sometimes hung my hat on one of the wooden poles at the edge of my bed, so I calmed myself down and fell back asleep. I woke up again around half an hour later and was again startled by the sight of the shadow at the end of my bed. But after my brain started to fully wake up, I remembered it was just my hat again. This process happened one more time that night, probably another half hour later. And once again, I was startled by the sight of the shadow. I was getting thirsty, so I reached my hand down to the side of my bed, looking for my water bottle, but I instead found something else, my hat. And at that instant, I felt my heart drop into my stomach, as I almost fell out of my bed trying to turn the lamp on. The light revealed the face of a man, peering over the edge of my bed, staring right into my eyes. I let out the highest pitched scream a boy could possibly produce, and ran straight past the man and down the stairs of my room. I felt the man try to grab me, but I managed to open the door and run to my parents' room to get my dad. My dad got the baton from under his bed and raced to my room, but he was too late. When we got back to my room, the window was wide open. Apparently the man jumped out onto the patio roof outside my window. When I was a kid, I had a huge group of friends that all happened to be on my block. On the weekend nights, we would always play manhunt, aka hide and go seek for older people. It worked out great because since we were all neighbors, we used all the front and backyards and even the woods behind our houses. We had a rule though, that we couldn't go out more than a backyard's length into the woods. I always used the same hiding spot, and nobody ever found me. I always hid behind an old rusty barrel that was thrown into the woods years ago. So on this particular night, there were only 6 of us playing. My friends Joe and Raj were on my team. We quickly dispersed as we were the first to hide. I ran to my usual hiding spot, through my backyard into the woods behind the barrel. Usually I would see the flashlights of the other team shining through the backyards in the woods, but it was unusually quiet this time. And then, I finally heard footsteps nearby. I didn't see a flashlight, so I assumed it was one of my teammates. I whispered Joe and Raj's names, but then whoever it was started charging at me, full on sprinting. I immediately shot up and ran out of the woods to find a new hiding spot in my backyard, but nobody ever came out of the woods. I heard all my friends calling my name from out front, including Joe and Raj, so I assumed something was wrong and went up front. I saw Joe's parents talking with my parents, with all my friends surrounding. My parents seemed a bit relieved to see me, so I was naturally really confused. They told me that a police officer had just passed by and warned them about a serial rapist spotted in the area and that all the kids should stay indoors. I explained what happened to me in the woods, and my parents started freaking out, making 100% sure that I wasn't lying. They called the police. I really don't know if he was ever caught, but I really hope he was. I try not to think about what would have happened to me had whoever that was caught me. When I was maybe 12 or 13, me, my mom, my stepdad, and 2 dogs went to the beach for a weekend. We rented an apartment all the way at the back of the shore. The apartment had nothing surreal to it at first sight. We unpacked everything and went out for dinner straight afterwards. We came back and at the time it was maybe 9 p.m. We watched some TV for an hour or so. My mom, stepdad, and 2 dogs slept on a bed you could make from the couch. They gave me the bedroom with a king-sized bed. I went to bed and used my computer for a while to play some games that I had pre-installed since I knew that there would be no internet connection there. I stayed up playing games pretty late at night. I decided it was time to get some shut-eye and go to sleep. Maybe after 5 minutes of laying in my bed, complete silence filled the room. But then, all of a sudden, I hear this extremely loud sigh. I knew it wasn't my parents or the dogs, considering the door to the living room was closed. I straight bolted from that room and went to sleep in the bedroom opposite of the master bedroom. My heart was pounding so fast because I was absolutely petrified. Needless to say, no sleep was had that night. I told my parents about it the next morning, and they told me it was probably just my imagination, but I was certain it was not. This story still gives me nightmares to this day. I was staying with one of my best friends in North Carolina where I had a job interview. I was coming from New Jersey, and my friend Mike offered to let me crash at his place for a few days. He didn't necessarily live too close to the company I was interviewing for, about 2 hours away, but I also just wanted to see one of my good friends again. So this happened after the second interview. I came back to Mike's place in a good mood as I had been offered the job on the spot. We celebrated in the yard that night with a few friends and a few beers, or a lot of beers. We stayed up late and basically got shit-faced. People were coming and going all night. That's the kind of person Mike is. He didn't really keep track of who entered and left his house. So at about 4 in the morning, after everyone had left, we called it a night. I struggled to make it up the stairs and to the bathroom. I drained the snake and soaked my face with hot water, and it was at that moment that I thought I could see something in the corner of my eye. I turned to the half-open door and saw an eye poking in at me through the crack of the door. I let out a loud "holy shit," and in my drunken klutzy state, I fell to the floor. When I got back on my feet, the eye was gone. I stumbled out of the bathroom and called Mike's name. I heard him call out in response from downstairs in the kitchen. It couldn't have possibly been him. I didn't hear anyone go down the stairs, but I asked if he was up there anyway. Expectedly, he replied with a no. I can't remember fully, but I assume I just brushed it off under the assumption that I had too much to drink. I made it to the guest bedroom and basically fell onto the bed, barely managing to throw the covers over myself. You know when you're drunk you fall asleep easier. That's an understatement. I think I fell asleep seconds after falling onto that bed, only to wake up after an unknown duration of sleep. I immediately felt the unbearable headache coming on, and began to rub my head. It was probably a little before sunrise. The room was a bit chilly. My foot was sticking out of the covers, hanging over the edge of the bed. And then it happened. I felt something extremely cold grab onto my foot and start stroking it. I then heard a raspy voice whisper the words, "Can you help me?" I sat up and screamed at the top of my lungs before sprinting out of the bed and out of the room, meeting Mike at the top of the stairs. I called the police and they arrived shortly. The intruder was actually a woman in her late 40s who clearly suffered from some kind of addiction. She admitted to simply walking right into Mike's house and hiding in a closet. The eye I saw was hers, peeking at me while in the bathroom. I always make sure to cover my feet with my sheets now. It was the dead of winter in Cali. Me and a couple buddies were on a skiing trip by South Lake Tahoe. We stayed in a big luxurious log cabin for a few nights. On the third night during a blizzard, I got up to get a glass of water late in the night. As I crossed the cabin over to the kitchen, there was a frantic knock at the door. I was a bit spooked that somebody would be knocking this late. I thought maybe I should just ignore it and let them go away. But I realized they knew we were there, as my car was parked right outside. I also had the thought that maybe somebody was in trouble and needed to get out of the dangerous weather. I tiptoed over to the door and waited for another knock. It didn't take too long before the knocking came again, this time much louder and more frantic. "Who is it?" I asked. Nobody answered. I asked again, louder, but there was still no answer. After I asked this, there was no more knocking. I grew curious and eventually opened the door a crack with the chain lock still on just in case. Nobody was outside. I undid the lock and opened the door completely. There were footprints in the snow leading away from the cabin. For whatever stupid reason, maybe I felt some kind of guilt and worry for a person in need. I slipped on my boots and jacket and stepped out into the storm to follow the footsteps before they were completely filled. The footsteps led me to the edge of the property before completely stopping. I shit you not, the footprints completely ended. Not a sign of vehicle marks, a struggle, nothing. It was as if whoever made the tracks was standing still, right where I was. I felt disturbed and ran back into the cabin and slammed the door shut behind me, making sure to lock it. Before I could even gather my thoughts, the frantic knocking at the door resumed. My heart started pounding, and I started to scream for my friends. One by one, they all rushed down to see what was wrong. When we opened the door, there was nobody there. The footprints were already filled. I never could prove what happened to my friends. I don't blame them for not believing me. I almost don't believe myself, but I know it happened. I just can't even try to explain it. It still freaks me out to this day. My friend and I were going to a party a few hours out of town, so we decided to stay at her family's holiday house about an hour south of the party. We arrived around mid-afternoon, and it was winter in a holiday town, so the area was completely empty. No other cars on the street. When we left for the party, I spent a moment deciding whether to pull the gate all the way closed. I'd had some trouble opening it earlier when we arrived, and if we were getting home late at night, I didn't want to be stuck outside. I ended up deciding to shut it for security. The party was great. We got back to the house around 12:30, and the gate was open. I immediately felt on edge because not only did I know that I had locked it, but I knew it couldn't just blow open in the wind. But I didn't want to make a big deal, so I was vague when my friend asked me if I'd shut it. We went inside and decided to make a snack. I was wandering through the house when suddenly my friend raced from the kitchen into the hallway and virtually tackled me to the ground. She was convinced she'd heard someone walking around outside. We tried to calm ourselves down, but we had no cell reception and there was no one else around. Over the next half hour or so, as we sat in the hallway paralyzed with fear, we heard footsteps outside and the back door being jimmied. We decided we had to leave, so we gathered everything up and got ready to make a break for the car. Just as we were at the front door ready to leave, there was a huge bang in the backyard, and suddenly what sounded like hundreds of birds started screaming. We legged it to the car. Ended up starting it with all our stuff still on our laps. We hadn't bothered to even put in the back seat. As we reversed out the driveway, we saw somebody running up the side of the house towards us. We sped the entire way home, and didn't sleep at all that night. When I was 10 and my youngest brother Ben was only 1, there was this one weekend that my parents were painting our bedrooms, so we would have to sleep in the basement. There was a pull-out couch down there that turned into a bed, and Ben had an extra crib down there. I was only 10, so sleeping in a pitch-dark basement was very uncomfortable. Somehow, having Ben down there made me feel a bit safer though. He would wake me up in the middle of the night crying, and for some reason, tending to him made sleeping down there a little less scary. But it was this one time that I woke up to him screaming. Not crying, screaming, like no 1-year-old should. I was scared shitless immediately and ran over to him to see what was wrong. He was standing up looking at me, pointing to something. I looked in the direction he was pointing at. He was pointing into the pitch-dark boiler room right next to his crib. I felt like 1,000 knives just stabbed me in the chest. And even through the heat of the moment, I vaguely remember the faint sound of something falling over in the boiler room, and I felt as if I was being watched in that basement. I grabbed Ben and got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. I have never gone back down in that basement. Number 4. This happened during a Boy Scout campout when I was 15. My friend who was supposed to share the tent with me called out from a trip at the last minute, so that meant I had to pitch the tent and sleep in it alone. The sun was going down, and after a long day of hiking, we got back to camp to set up our tents. It was already dark at that point, and I was still trying to set it up. It wasn't as easy doing it yourself. Someone came over and finally helped me, and then we ate dinner. After the cliched telling of scary stories around the campfire, we all went to sleep. I guess I was a little happy that I had my own tent at that point, since I had more room. I fell asleep quickly, but woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of somebody stomping around my tent. I immediately assumed it was another scout going to take a leak or something. You may be thinking that all our tents were pitched right next to each other, but our scoutmasters actually had us pitch our tents far apart, so I was pretty far from my closest scout mates. The stomping around the tent seemed to just be going around in a circle, so at that point, I was sure somebody was messing with me. I asked who it was, and in response to that, they stomped off into the woods. I almost found myself going out and following them, but I figured it wasn't worth it, and just tried to fall back to sleep. But after that, it was hard to. Sure enough, the stomping came back, and started circling the tent again. I was pissed off now, so I got up and unzipped the door to the tent. I was expecting to see another scout, but when I confronted the person making the noise, instead I saw a grown man, probably 6'5", in his mid-30s. My heart was racing and I couldn't even gather up the courage to scream. The man gave me a creepy smile and then brought his finger to his lips, signaling for me to be quiet. I did a quick 180 and sprinted to my scoutmaster's tent, screaming like a baby. He ran out before I even reached the tent, and I told him about the man I saw. He and the other scoutmaster ran over to my tent with one of the hunting rifles, but they didn't find the man. They did, however, pick up on the tracks the man left walking around the tent. We were all told to bring our tents closer together, like literally right on top of each other. The trip was cut short the next day and we all went home. I have never gone camping since, and I never will again. Number 3. So me and a couple of my buddies went camping last summer alongside the Willamette River. We actually had a decent hike into the deep end of woods. We did some night fishing, listening to music, and basically drank to the point where everything was funny later in the night. I would guess we finally called it a night somewhere past 2 a.m. I shared a tent with one of my buds while the other two shared another tent. We heard them laughing about something. At first we laughed at the sound of their laughing, but it soon got annoying and we yelled to them to shut up. One of them responded, "It isn't us." I sat up, startled at the response. I came to realize that it was the sound of only one person laughing, and it didn't sound like either one of my friends. Even in my drunk state, I realized how odd it was for somebody to be out this far in the woods so late at night. The laughing gradually got closer and louder to our campout. My friend shot up and looked at me with a worried look on his face. I heard my other friends scream over to us that they were getting freaked out. As the laughing got even closer, I could make it out very clearly to be the laugh of a male, probably in his 30s or 40s. He sounded like he was as drunk as us, messing around with friends, but we only heard his laugh, nobody else. There was something indescribably creepy about his laugh too, as if it was missing something to it. You had to be there to understand what I mean. The laughing was now just at the edge of our campsite, but we couldn't hear any footsteps at all. Now that may not seem like a big deal. It was impossible to move through that without making noise. And finally, all of a sudden, the laughing stopped completely. We had no idea where whoever that was standing, as he hadn't made a single stepping sound. We sat there in silence looking at each other. My friend was clearly freaking out, but he was keeping it together the best he could. Finally, something broke the silence. The sound of something rubbing against the cottony fabric of the tent. We saw the outline of a hand through the moonlight, pressing on the tent. We both screamed at the top of our lungs before getting out of the tent. We ran as fast as we could through the woods, our other friends following us. After about 5 minutes of running, we somehow found our car. I actually puked from running so much before taking the wheel. I don't condone drinking and driving, but I still believe we were just in this situation. By far the most horrific experience of my life. No idea who or what the hell that was, or what they wanted. Number 2. After college, I went backpacking in the Canadian wilderness for a few weeks by myself. To put this in perspective, I was in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was a 3-hour bus ride away, and I only saw one other person, who was from a distance. He was in a canoe, during the entire 7 days. I brought a few disposable cameras with me, as this was before digital cameras were too widespread. I took a lot of pictures. When I got home, I had them developed and took a look at them. The pictures were standard nature shots, until I got about halfway through my first camera. There were 2 pictures of me asleep in my tent in my sleeping bag. I literally freaked out when I saw it, and I had a complete breakdown. To this day, I have no idea how those pictures got taken. I haven't been camping since, and I sleep with my door open and my curtains shut, and I still get the paranoid feeling that whoever took those pictures is still watching me somehow. Number 1. My boyfriend and I decided to go out to the gorge for some quality time camping. We had always gone with several other people, but this was the first time it was just us two. When we got out of our car to prep our gear for the mile hike back to the camping spot, 2 sketchy looking dudes came out of the trailhead, eyed us, and went back onto their old school Volkswagen camper van. I had a weird feeling but shrugged it off and proceeded back to our camping spot. I had previously camped in the same area a handful of times, and I knew it pretty well. Once we got back there, I knew of a handful of different camping spots and proceeded to check them all out for the one that would be ideal for us. I noticed what looked like someone camping further up the hill, so I picked a spot a little further down where we'd most likely be out of sight. Not out of earshot though, as I heard him yelling with someone else back over on the trail. It was starting to get dark by the time we got everything set up, so I figured I'd start looking for firewood. Suddenly, this guy appears out of nowhere and asks us if we'd like any help and offered to sell us a bundle of firewood for $10. I laughed because we were in the woods, thus surrounded by wood, which I could pick up off the ground for free. He then said that I wouldn't find much because they'd already cleared it out over the past few weeks. Few weeks? I asked him how long he'd been camping up there and he said almost a month. I already had the creeps about him and he claimed he was up there by himself. I asked him why I heard him yelling with someone then, and that he had referred to more people when he was talking about the wood. He stammered and was like, yeah, there's some dudes I know camping over there, but up on the other side of the river. Then he proceeds to tell us that he's been lonely since he arrived. He was from Pennsylvania, took a bus to Lexington, and had been living in the woods back behind where I currently work. I knew exactly where he was talking about, because I saw some homeless people, immigrants, and drug addicts coming in and out of those woods every day. So basically, he was a homeless man who somehow got a ride out to the gorge and decided he would just live there instead. He had been living on snakes, bugs, and selling firewood for money. But he said we were the first people he'd seen in a few weeks. His stories were all over the place, and I knew he was lying about a lot of what he told us. He wasn't alone even if he claimed to be. He even took us to his camp where there were tons of stuff for several guys, not just one. He said he likes camping up top where he could see everything, and everyone. Then showed up our campsite. He had a straight shot view. By now it was dark and he helped us get a fire going. I was trying to politely get him on his way back up the hill so I could have a minute to process all of this. When he left, I started whispering to my boyfriend that there was no way in hell I could sleep with that lying, sketchy homeless creep right up the hill. We didn't have a gun, knife, or even a dog to protect ourselves if we needed to. My boyfriend somehow convinced me to stay a little longer, so we planned to stay the night. But all throughout the night, we heard twigs and branches snapping around our tarp, as if somebody was watching us. It was that man. I knew it was. He was standing out there, watching us. I said let's quietly get our shit together and get the hell out of there, which we did, only we left our new tarp set up because they would make too much noise and he'd know we were leaving. As soon as I stood up with my pack, ready to get the hell out of there, he yells, "Leaving so soon?" We proceeded to get away from there as quickly as possible. The most disturbing thing, as we were getting away from there, the man yelled for us to come back. That only made us go even faster. In my mind, we were either getting robbed, raped, killed, or something, because he was not alone. His stories didn't add up, and his background of where he came from made me believe he was running from something and was trying to hide by living off the grid. I called the rangers the next morning and told them about him. Luckily, all he got from us was a set of new tarps.